Welcome to Inspiring Perspectives, a podcast by thinkPARALLAX featuring fresh takes and bold ideas for the real-world sustainability challenges and solutions at some of the world's most respected brands and companies. I'm your host, Derek Sabori, and this is what sustainability sounds like today. All right. Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Inspiring Perspectives. This is the show where I chat with experts in this space with the aim of delivering valuable takeaways and really actionable advice on a whole wide range of topics that are being talked about in corporate sustainability. So today I'm here with Mike Schwartz, a sustainability leader at Republic Services. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Derek. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you because there's a lot of sustainability work going on at Republic. You know a lot about it, so we're going to dive into all of that. But I just want to kind of get people familiar with Republic Services because it's pretty fascinating how big the organization is, right? 42,000 employees, it looks like, 13 million customers, 17,000 trucks, about 15 billion in revenue, 5 million daily pickups, 75 recycling centers, 5 million tons of materials processed in recycling centers. We've got 73 renewable energy projects. All sorts of stuff going on. This is a big ship to steer, right?
It sure is, yeah. And all of those numbers, a few of them I know well enough to know that they're bigger than what you said already, because that's the only direction in a space where growth comes from acquisition. That's the only direction everything goes is up. So we get bigger every year.
Yeah, and funny enough, I saw a Republic truck drive by this morning. I'm like, I'm gonna have a chat with Mike today. But you guys, I mean, you're more than just sort of handling waste, right? It's on your website. It says you're the most complete set of recycling, waste, and environmental solutions, a single source provider. But you guys offer advanced recycling, solid waste, special waste, hazardous waste treatment and disposal. You've got all these different industrial services, 24/7 emergency response and equipment rental and cleaning. I mean, what else is in there?
Oh, you touched on, I think, the vast majority of it. I think when we talk about some of the sustainable innovation, that'll round it out. But we've been doing more than just waste and recycling for a long time. And then in 2022, we bought US Ecology and integrated them and a bunch of mid-sized players that we tucked in under that acquisition, and that was a lot of the non-traditional waste stream processing and disaster cleanup, all of those pieces.
Wow, really interesting. Well, I feel like we should do maybe a little bit of looking back before we dive into the work that you're doing there at Republic, because you had a pretty interesting range of experiences in this space. And so I know you're really passionate about finding market solutions to environmental and social problems, supporting business goals, and driving stakeholder value. But give us a little bit of your how I got here story, how you landed there at Republic. What was the lead up to this role?
Sure, yeah. And it's something that often when I tell this story without the disclaimer I'm about to share, people say, wow, you just had a clear path. You knew where you were going the whole time. And that is not the case. A lot of it just fell into place. One decision I made was to get my master's in environmental science and management at the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara.
Okay.
And that's a 2-year interdisciplinary master's that really set me up for the type of complex problem solving across disciplines. There's some law, policy, economics, hard sciences. And from that role, I found my way into a startup called Carbon Credit Capital that was building some frameworks for monetizing carbon offsets and also helping project developers work on new streams of revenue, especially in the developing world. And at that role, I wore all the different hats as one does in a tiny startup. And then one very intentional decision I made was I learned of the company EcoVadis while I was at Carbon Credit Capital, and I saw that they were, at the time, pretty clearly the largest headcount of a fully sustainability-focused company. And I joined them as something like employee number 200, working on their assessments. I touched more than 1,000 assessments of different companies from one person to over 100,000 people over the time I was there. And I also had a product role where I was the voice of the 100-something person analyst team on a cross-functional committee with a representative from marketing, from sales, from each of the different verticals, working with the folks in IT to create a product roadmap and to build out new modules. And I took all of that work into consulting, which were the next two roles over a few years, where I was moving a little bit closer to the work. So at EcoVadis, I was assessing, I was reading a lot of documents that came through, but I was not part of the decision-making process. I didn't know where the information came from in the organization. I didn't know what the governance structure was unless that was part of what they were publishing. I didn't know if they reported into marketing or legal or finance or somewhere else in the organization. And I also had no basis of understanding why company A in a given sector looks different than company B in a given sector. That's their own decisions about their valuation and value add in the market. And as a consultant, I got a little bit closer to that. I was able to actually be delivering work on behalf of the clients, hearing where the clients were in the organization, what decisions were happening, what their governance structures were. And that enabled me to get a bit more ownership. And I really did a crash course in learning all of the different voluntary, at the time, almost everything was a voluntary reporting standard and raters and rankers, benchmarking against peers, gap analyses, getting all of this different data from across the business from many different subject matter experts and putting it in a form that is palatable from the company's perspective to go out to the public and from various public external stakeholders to be able to digest that information for their needs from customers, investors, any other group that's looking for environmental, social, governance information.
Yeah.
And then there was a pretty smooth transition coming in-house to Republic, where I then was the one who was actually, in many cases, making the decisions or convening our sustainability steering committee and working with engagement with investors, putting materials together for the board. And I continue to help us grow our strategy while we continue to report really robustly.
Yeah. What's really interesting to me is that, a company like Republic, which was once kind of known as just disposal company or handling, managing waste, is now described as sustainable solutions to create a cleaner, safer, and healthier world, right? So that space has evolved, and obviously Republic is really leaning into, all of the opportunities for sustainability there, and it sounds like you've played a big part of it. But I want to start with, what's one of the biggest misconceptions that consumers might have about their curbside pickup companies? I think you know where I'm going with this, because there are all sorts of rumors out there in terms of what gets recycled, what doesn't, what goes to waste, how do you even handle single stream recycling, etc.
People love to tell me that recycling isn't real. And they're willing to listen when I talk to them, but there are some sound bites that are out there, some statistics about only 9% of plastics in the US get recycled. I think that's a number that's out there.
Yeah, I
and
hear that.
When people hear that, they think that means of the materials that end up in a recycling container, if it's plastic, there's more than a 9 out of 10 chance that it's not going to be recycled. The reality is that most plastics that are produced in and used in North America are not recyclable because they're plastic films. They're like your garbage bags, your grocery bags, they're saran wrap, they're packaging from things that you might buy on the internet.
Yeah.
And the things that are recyclable, the only things that we will tell our customers are recyclable are, depending on the market, usually plastics 1, 2, and 5, which are those are the labels on the containers. And if those plastics end up in a recycling container, and then that recycling container will send it to a materials recovery facility at one of our recycling centers. We will sort it, and it will end up back in a new product as its next life.
Yeah, and I've seen those MRFs, as we call them, right? As you call them, and they're really impressive, right? When you walk through there, I mean, there are conveyor belts, there are like these vacuums, there are things blowing things, there are hands kind of going through things. So you watch it all kind of come into one place, and then it's separated along the way in sort of this maze of mechanics, and this kind of wondrous functional system. It's pretty efficient, right?
Yeah, it's amazing the technology that's in there. And the way that recycling has, in its foundational form, developed over time with new technologies. So at our recycling centers, and that's the term that we've been using, trying to keep it accessible for
Mm.
most folks out there. At our recycling centers, there are many different conveyor belts. There's many different sortation stations. There's some amount of um, individual picking out of contaminants, or at the very end, a last chance line where maybe something that shouldn't have been pulled out of the line gets pulled back in as a
Hmm.
one-off. But there's processes to separate everything so it's on a pretty flat layer, and then it can be sorted visually. There's mechanisms to allow for big things to stay on top and small things to fall down. There is the use of optical sensors or near infrared sensors, which are using cameras and imaging to determine what material is passing under the sensor, and
Hmm.
then using some technology, often puffs of air jets, to direct
Yeah.
which materials go in which to which place. We also use eddy currents, so to temporarily magnetize some of the materials passing through, so that we can pull out the ones that can be magnetized from the ones that can't. It's really a tremendous mechanical factory, if you will.
Yeah. Are there a lot of innovations that continue to happen in that space, or is it sort of kind of what it is? It is what it is, or do you see it continuing to evolve and advance?
Yeah, it's absolutely continuing to evolve.
Yeah.
We are the first company in North America, and in many ways the first company, full stop, that is managing curbside collection of plastics, where not just curbside, but dumpster back of restaurant, anywhere where there's a recycling container.
Hmm.
Through that whole process that I was just describing of separating the plastics from the papers from the metals, and in some cases maybe a little bit more separating different grades of those materials from each other, they get baled together, and the plastics then move on to our network of polymer centers, which the first polymer center opened about a year ago in Las Vegas, and the second one is scheduled to open next month in Indianapolis. And there's going to be at least a couple more across the country, where it's a hub and spoke model. So the Vegas Polymer Center is taking all of our plastics from our recycling centers in the Western U.S. and a lot of volume from third parties, and it's separating them to an even finer granularity. So
Mm.
there's some amount of color sorting, sorting the different polymers from each other. Some of the plastics are being uh, hot washed and flaked, and then they can actually allow for a plastic bottle to become a plastic bottle again.
Hmm.
And that's something that we can do because of our volume,
Yeah.
and because we saw an opportunity. We saw that all of these consumer product goods companies have public facing goals to use a certain percentage of post consumer content by 2025, 2030, and the volumes did not exist on the market, certainly not at the quality that they were demanding. And we
Mm.
we said, well, we're going to fill that gap. And it's a big gap, and their demand was high. The first customer that was announced was Coca-Cola. So they're going to be using that hot washed and flaked material, telling their suppliers that they are buying a portion of their material from us so that they can
Wow.
make a plastic bottle back into a plastic bottle.
And surely, if they're buying from you, that just means others are going to fall in line and continue to buy, which will allow you to continue to scale up and just do more and more
That's
of that
absolutely
work.
the case. And I want to hold on to that distinction of a plastic bottle becoming a plastic bottle. Recycling today often, not always, depends on the material, depends on the market, but often means taking a really high quality plastic and turning it into maybe a medium quality plastic, or maybe a
Downcycling.
lower quality plastic. Exactly. So often things like plastic bottles turn into a fiber that can make, like, this is a relatively high quality, can become clothing. It's a durable good, it'll last a while, but it's just one more life, and that clothing can't become more clothing, at least not at the same volume.
Hmm.
Or a park bench or a pipe are really the more common downcycled, or carpet, something where you don't have to have as much differentiation in the color, in the exact materials. There's kind of just general durability is needed.
Yeah.
And by having this network of polymer centers, we're proving that vertical integration can happen on plastics recycling without needing to bring in totally new processes, but actually just working with a lot of the companies that we've already spent time working with, and together designing new systems to create the highest value product that we can, highest value post-use material, post-consumer material.
Yeah, and you're touching on something I think that is really crucial, and we hear about it all the time, right? If you go to a panel or a conference, you're always going to hear everybody talking about collaboration and partnership and that none of us can do this alone. What you're talking about is a perfect example of that, because you cannot go in and build these technologies just saying, you know what, I think what we really need, I would imagine you're going to have to start partnering with the end user, understanding what those bottles are like coming in. Did they design them the right way? So you've got to work with everybody, with the bottler, to make sure that this technology works for theirs. How's that been? How important has that been?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of new space that we are entering. One of the things that has been asked of us a lot is a comparison of our product with either virgin plastic or recycled plastic from another process, another
Mm.
market. And so that involves a life cycle assessment or product carbon footprint. And that's an area where, from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint, globally across our operations, or for different traditional end use, we have different methods of calculating or approximating those types of calculations, but we don't have it is new for us to do that for something that's a product compared to an existing product on the market.
Mm.
There's also a lot of questions that have come up around traceability, that the fact that we are vertically integrated here, if we're handling it from the moment the consumer hands it to us in
Yeah.
their recycling container through to it becoming a feedstock for manufacturing, that is clear visibility. And so long as we have our within organization counts of volumes of materials at each step, which we do, that's
Mm-hmm.
just how we measure the volumes and productivity of our business. That helps us have a leg up compared to someone who's only buying third-party volumes, which we're doing some of, and so there is a piece of that as well. And this polymer center isn't the end of that vertical integration on plastics. Some of the materials, the HDPE and polypropylene, are going to a new joint venture called Blue Polymers, which is between Republic and Ravago, which is a traditional plastics manufacturer. And so we're going to be working with them. The first site is co-located in Indianapolis, where that second polymer center is. And the second, Blue Polymers, broke ground a number of months ago here in Arizona.
Hmm.
And that's going to be producing actual packaging products, materials that can be used directly by brands.
So packaging to packaging, basically, right? It was once packaging turning into packaging again.
Yep.
That's really cool. And I think I would imagine there are even more things. What are some of the other exciting things that are going on over there that we can talk about? Because I don't want to talk
Yeah.
about how it's working, what's making these things successful for a company this big. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to orchestrate all this. So tell me some more exciting things that are happening over there.
Yeah. Probably the next thing to talk about in sustainable innovation is something that the newest piece of what I'm going to describe is just volume, and that's landfill gas to energy, specifically a big focus on renewable natural gas. So renewable natural gas is taking the methane produced in landfills coming from the microbes decomposing organic material in
Mm-hmm.
this environment that has no oxygen in it, and those microbes produce methane gas. That methane gas is mixed with other gases that come out of the landfill, and we can refine it so that it's chemically the same as fossil natural gas or petroleum natural gas.
Mm.
And then it can go straight into a pipeline. And there's all sorts of regulatory incentives to support the production of this alternative to fossil natural gas, especially for use in vehicle fleets.
Yeah. Real quick question. Are the incentives for capturing it or delivering it and processing it, or both?
Yeah.
Or is that kind of the same
So
thing?
it's a full circle that it involves refiners being obligated to engage in this market, petroleum refiners being obligated to engage in this market.
Okay.
Um, then there's a credit that is generated by the creation, by I think three things need to happen. The fuel needs to be created, a refiner needs to be engaged, and it needs to be delivered to a fleet. So it's specifically meant for use in vehicle fuels because it was born out of at the federal level, the EPA's renewable fuel standards, and in California and a handful of other states either have or are working on similar low carbon fuel standards.
Mm. Do you think so? I've got to jump in here and ask you this: with the EPA, with those mandates, kind of, I guess, directing this and giving this the force to create, make it what it was. Now there's a marketplace for it. We've got a new administration coming in. Things may or may not change. If they do, is this kind of marketplace and technology so far along that you see it like, hey, it's off and running? Or is there a chance, though, that it just dries up and we no longer are doing it? What's your take?
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I do have is my probably most hopeful piece of news that I've read since the election when it comes to any of these questions,
Mm-hmm.
which is that Exxon has asked the Trump administration not to back out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
I heard that at an event last night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
interesting.
if Exxon is saying stay the course, that it is not because Exxon says this could have always been the best thing for business. It's because Exxon says we've now invested, this is where we're going. It's going to be bad for business if you make us do an about face.
Interesting.
And that's a really high level. The climate agreement is an international treaty. It's not a policy level, but we have our obligations under that agreement. And how will that play out? To be determined.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if Exxon is saying stay the course, then I think that there is a lot of hope for the rules like the ones that we're describing to continue to remain in effect.
Yeah.
On the renewable natural gas,
Yeah.
um, the volume piece, I didn't even get to the headline, which
Mm.
is that in a joint venture with BP through a company that they acquired called Archaea, we have the largest ever portfolio of landfill gas to renewable natural gas projects underway, which is something more than 40 landfills that are going to be creating that pipeline grade renewable natural gas.
Wow. And so at that point, I mean, does this become, I guess, almost like a doom loop where it gets to the point where you're sending so much fuel that you're like, we need more stuff in the landfill. Then what
Yeah,
happens?
and that's something that we're really conscious of. One thing that avoids that doom loop is a reality of landfills. That a landfill today is not something that's an open pit. It's a highly engineered site with layers of foundation and liners and pipes to collect gases. A lot is going on there due to how little oxygen there is within the landfill
Mm-hmm.
and how long it takes for decomposition to happen. Everything that was put in the landfill in the last year basically produces no gas. It
Mm.
peaks maybe, depending on environmental conditions, between 7 and 10 years from now, and it continues to produce gas through decomposition at least a decade after that. So we have a long runway with what is going to continue to be business as usual for some amount of time. And that's
Yeah.
business as usual, not by our decision making, but by our customers saying, look, to some extent, we're not willing to separate our materials out, or we're not willing to pay the price premium for the value added service that is recycling.
Mm.
And so we're going to continue giving you things that need to end up in a landfill. And if we didn't exist, either someone else would be putting it in a landfill or it would be ending up on the side of the road. So we say the best we can do is to manage these landfills as responsibly and effectively as possible.
Yeah, that seems fair. Um, there's that where I was kind of circling up on just all the other things. You've got these renewable energy projects as well. You can go to the site. There's all sorts of things you guys are doing. Your electrification efforts as well of your fleet. I want to talk though a little bit about what drives this. What has helped bring these things to life? Is it sort of people like you? Is it your customers saying this, or is it leadership that's really
Yeah.
saying this is important for us? This is where we're going. Let's go.
So our CEO, who's been at the company, I think something more than a dozen years, has been in the CEO seat for the last three. And he's the one who brought sustainability in action as basically our tagline. It's
Mm.
on the my desktop background, it's on my business card, it's in my email signature, and it's not just words in those places. It comes paired with our purpose as an organization, which is
Mm.
to partner with customers to create a more sustainable world. And all of these sustainable innovations that we've spoken about, including fleet electrification, which there's so much to say about total cost of ownership and how that's a business decision, we see we look for business opportunities that align with doing the right thing and being the most responsible stewards for the environment and for society as we
Mm.
can be. So it's coming straight from the top of the organization that this is our brand. And he's been on CNBC talking about us as our history was as a waste company, and then as a waste and recycling company. And then we put recycling first, recycling and waste. Okay, maybe that's just a branding piece, but
Mm-hmm.
that's where we were starting to put the focus as we added, as we really grew with US ecology, environmental services. But we're a sustainability company in so many different ways where we are leaders and innovators in bringing value back into the environment and minimizing or reducing harm that would happen in our absence.
Yeah, that's got to be really exciting. And I think for somebody like you who's kind of come at it from a different couple of different angles to get in there, and I wonder if it's surprising once you got in there to realize, see that just like you said, this is a sustainability company. You're not necessarily just working on sustainability in a company, but that's what the company does. That's exciting.
So, so something I've said as sustainability and ESG have had their booms and in some cases busts,
Mm-hmm.
is that I didn't decide to go to the school for the environment because I thought it was going to be lucrative. Um, Having said that, once I started seeing company after company, and EcoVadis, who I left years ago, but since I left, they're now a unicorn with $1 billion valuation. Company after company is seeing that responsibility with respect to the environment and society is a business opportunity that millennials and even more so Gen Z want to work for companies that are responsible. They want to buy products that they feel good about. They want to hold people accountable, hold companies accountable when they're not engaging in the most responsible way. And all of that comes to a head with Republic. So was I pleased? For sure.
Mm.
Was I knocked off my stool? No. I was glad to see leadership recognizing something that has been recognized through surveys and other public forums for some time,
Yeah.
because that is our future as an organization and as a society.
Well, and as a company this size, I should have checked before, but I would imagine Republic is a public company.
Yeah, we're like a Fortune 300,
There we
15
go. So,
billion.
but you cannot, your CEO is not going to be talking about sustainability in action and putting all of this effort into it if it's not making good business sense. And I
Exactly.
know in sort of our prep notes as well, you told me, I mean, there's support, at other levels, right? Tell me about the
Yeah,
board. You guys have steering committees.
yeah.
What's the governance like here to keep it all in play?
So, as the sustainability team, we convene a steering committee of senior leaders from across all the verticals of the organization, from legal, marketing, sales, operations, finance, investor relations, and we work with them to set our strategy and action plan, and um, how we make sure that it's not some siloed strategy that has nothing to do with it is part of the enterprise strategy. So we,
Mm,
we work to make decisions that are aligned with what the rest of the organization is doing.
yeah.
And we also have a board committee, a sustainability and corporate responsibility committee that meets as almost or about as frequently as the full board meets.
Wow.
And they both the steering committee and the board committee get eyes on our reporting before it's published. Um, we've also put in place compensation targets for our executives that are tied to a few of our key sustainability goals. And that's an accountability mechanism that I have seen impact how seriously how serious we are about making progress towards those goals.
Yeah, I bet. And that's something you hear about that, and that you always sort of put that in there. It's like, hey, this is part of our strategy. We should do this, but not everybody goes through with it. So kind of hats off to you guys for that.
Yeah, thanks.
And I know it sounds like this language is helping you embed it really just into everything you do, because I know you've got these 4 elements of sustainability: safety, talent, climate leadership, and communities. So you're really approaching it from all different angles. What about your employees, though? Tell me about employees and customers. How are you engaging them? How are they
Yeah.
responding?
So yeah, that talent pillar is really important for us. We have more than 40,000 people who are out there in the world wearing our badge or clothes, like literally representing us when our largest population of employees is drivers who are very far from our physical operations in a big truck with our name on it. And when they get out of their truck, they're still wearing something with our name on it. It's important for us to have them feel like they're part of an organization, not just that they are cogs in a wheel.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from a business sense and from everything else that we're talking about: reputation and responsibility. We take measures to highlight when our frontline workers are engaged in their communities. Their stories of a child on one of our drivers' routes every day, like, pulls their parent out to the street because they want to say hi to one of our employees,
Yeah.
and our employee makes a point of stopping and doing a little show and moving around the arms of the truck to really engage with that kid. And that's a kid who's going to have a positive association with this really important work of making sure that all these waste materials are responsibly managed for the
Yeah.
rest of that kid's life.
So cool. I know my kid was one of those kids as well that we always had to take him out to the truck because he just loved the sound of it, the power, the energy of it, and watching the arm pull up the cans. I know, Mike, you're always, I know you're a real advocate for finding the business case and things. So obviously you've painted that, right. This is a good business. Do you ever get the sense, though, just like any other business, though, that there are sustainability, does it feel, though, like a cost center there? Are there still times when it feels like a cost center, or do you guys really attack it to where if you're making a decision, it's right for the business, it's a good investment, and we're going to see a good return on this eventually?
So our corporate sustainability team is 3 headcount. So even where there is cost, the organization is lean and keeping the cost low.
Mm.
There's also the reality that you named: public company, fiduciary duty. We have an obligation to maximize our shareholder returns,
Mm-hmm.
and that means we're going to do everything we can to find those opportunities. So there's a lot of ways where the corporate sustainability team, I should say, the activity of reporting is a cost center. That's the nature of the thing.
That's
We are
true. Yeah.
collecting data from many different people who are spending that time to respond to our engagements, to put the data in the right format. We are also then working with it to continue to make sure that the format is as it needs to be for public-facing purposes. There's cost to design. There's cost to get outside advisory support. It takes time for our team to review, for it to go through all our steering committee and other levels of reviews that
Yeah.
I shared. That's not the only thing that our team does. And we, as much as possible, try to leverage that reporting activity for value add.
Yeah.
So we don't report to it is a means, not an end. So when we click publish, that's the beginning of the next phase. The next phase is benchmarking against our peers or benchmarking against other leaders who are not in our sector but have a sustainability leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
That's also conducting a gap analysis against all the third parties, and there are many, who assess us. We
Yeah.
don't look at every single one at the same granularity every year. We know which ones we want to look at really closely every year, and that took work too, to limit down, to be able to focus on the ones that on the raters and rankers that our customers and investors and other key stakeholders are really paying the most attention to.
Yeah.
And what happens when we perform well on those raters and rankers, or when we provide as much data as possible, it means that our all of those stakeholders who I just named are seeing us as a little bit stickier at the very least. They're also maybe seeing us as a little more transparent, a little bit of a safer bet. They know what they're getting into. Sometimes we see ourselves taking the stance of this might not be the best number that we want to see, but we're the first in our industry to disclose it. And if that's where we are, then that leading position is also worth something.
Sure.
And then there's a story that comes to me from when I was in grad school that's related to this question of what does it mean to work in corporate sustainability. There was a speaker who came. He's speaking from the front of the room, and he's telling about how when he was finishing up his PhD in sustainable development, it was like 2009. The job market was not good. He couldn't find any traction anywhere, and he gets a phone call from, and I'm just going to say a big box store because I've tried to fact check it and I can't. The company that I thought that it is, it may or may not be, but anyway, big box store calls him and says, "We want you to help build out our inaugural sustainability team." And this guy goes running to his dissertation advisor in this crisis of faith saying, "I just dedicated 5 years of my life to sustainable development, and this company that just like sells cheap stuff, that's where my future is. That's the one place, that's the one option." And his dissertation advisor grabs him by the shoulders and says, "Do you understand how big they are? Do you understand what this opportunity is? You take a huge ship and you steer it just a little bit different. You change its heading just a little bit, and over time, it is so far from where it would have been if you hadn't been there. And its suppliers will make different products to continue to be sold by that company." And that's the foundation of everything that I've done in my career, is understanding that everything out there is bigger than I am, and what I can do is help steer it a little bit. And it's really nice to be at a company that is already amenable to these things, but there's always more opportunity.
That's for sure. Well, speaking of, more opportunity, I want to kind of wrap up with a few kind of takeaways from you, but I do want to ask, I always like to ask this question of people in your position because you're working on so many things. You just mentioned reporting, and so there are disclosures, you're dealing with recycling and circularity and methane capture, etc. But I wonder what topic, if you were in charge of our show and you were programming for us, like, is there a topic that you had to zero in on one topic? What's something that you think people should really pay attention to? They might be an upcoming sustainability pro, an aspiring sustainability professional. What would you have them focus on if you could just pick one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the thing that's coming to mind to me right now is the number of people who have asked me what I think of the regulated disclosure environment, what I think of all the rules with California, with SEC rules. Probably those will have a different fate given the new administration, but we will see, or at least a near-term fate. But the CSRD in Europe, and my answer is pretty consistently, if at any point before those rules were in force, you asked me what it's going to take to get the planet to move in the right direction so that the most severe impacts of climate change don't completely change what we understand to be the society and this planet, my answer was regulation. So if I were going to do anything in the face of regulation other than say, yes, please may I have some more, that would be hypocritical of me, and I've seen the same in my peers. So if you are newly in this space, absorb those emerging rules.
Interesting.
That doesn't necessarily mean read cover to cover the CSRD regulations, but read about them, see how the conversation is evolving, watch closely when compliance starts. Where are compliance actions happening? What is the burden of alignment with the stated rules that companies actually have to follow in the first year of enforcement? Does it change in the second year of enforcement? There's a lot out there that is going to be a mandated responsibility for every company. And if you can be part of that, then you will have a safe space in any company that's going to be regulated.
Good advice.
That is regulated.
Yeah, I like that. I also think it's important for people to even study up on looking back. How did we get here? How did we get to the point where regulation, came into play? I think that's really interesting. That's a great point. Mike, let's wrap this up for listeners. Give me a few takeaways for either that aspiring pro, somebody who's building out a sustainability, division or a department. Maybe they're a big company, they haven't started anything yet. What do you want to leave people with in terms of how to really move the needle, get things across the line, and really make the progress that we need them to make?
Yeah, thank you. This is where we see how well I summarize.
That's right.
The first one that I'm going to say is finding leadership buy-in.
Mm.
I talked about it a good bit with our CEO, with the board engagement, with the executive compensation targets. That happened at Republic, quite frankly, from a combination of top up or top down and bottom up. If it isn't the case where you are today, think about organizational behavior and how you move the needle, how you get supporters, and how you prove that there really is an opportunity. The next thing that I'd say is that you should expect that resources will be constrained and that you're going to have to learn to work within those resources. And even in organizations that are investing heavily and doing sustainability work like we are, there's some tactics to overcome this, learning to influence without authority, or delegating to supporters. This is also organizational behavior stuff, delegating to supporters outside of the sustainability organization, finding alignment with other teams or leaders' goals. If someone has a budget for something and you have an overlapping you have an initiative that can have an overlapping benefit for them, then maybe their budget can unlock that opportunity. And that's something that's not, I think the last thing I'd say is that that's not only internal. You can also partner outside of your organization. I talked about a couple different joint ventures where we had the wherewithal and humility to say, we want to engage, but this isn't our domain. We need to work with someone else to get there. And that is also really big for us. For anybody who was at GreenBiz 2024, one of our first built from the ground up electric refuse collection vehicles was the backdrop to lunches and to happy hours. And that truck was built by McNeilus, and that truck was only there with McNeilis's support because that's what it took as I was trying to find the buy-in and the engagement from all the people inside the company. Lots of people were excited about it. There was some amount of funding available, but that last bit of funding actually came from partnering with our supplier so that they could get the visibility of their truck in an opportunity that they wouldn't have sought out without us, but they were happy to engage in.
Yeah, that was great. I was there. I saw the truck there and people loved it, loved taking the photos. So that's great advice. So getting that leadership buy-in, knowing that you've got to work within those constraints, work with what you've got. I love, tapping into becoming an ally, building allies within the organization to tap into their resources. And I also think you've got to learn to put together a good pitch. You're always pitching something, right? It's like, here's why we need it. You got to be able to do your research, do your benchmarking. So you're always sort of entrepreneurial in that role, and then really leaning into those partnerships. So good advice, Mike. Thank you so much. Thanks for the work you're doing over there, because I know it has a big impact. That's for sure. A company of that size. So, anything else you want to leave listeners with? We can send them to the website. I'll give them all the links to all the great things that are going on. But any last thoughts?
Just hearing your summary, especially for folks coming to sustainability from a passion and maybe something of a sense of purity, sales and marketing are not dirty words, because you're going to need them to unlock anything. You're always advocating for something, and sales and marketing are tools to get there. Even if it's a casual conversation with your coworker, if you have a goal in mind, you're going to have to convince them. So lean into those domains as opposed to calling them out as consumerist or something that is only on the other side of where you are.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's good advice. And it's just coincidence that we're both wearing our sweater button up. So that there's not a dress code for sustainability professionals either. So don't let that sway you. But listen to what Mike said. That's great advice. Mike, thanks so much. I appreciate you being on the show. And we'll catch up with you soon and maybe touch back in when when you've got other new exciting projects that come to light. So good luck with it.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hey, thanks for checking out our show today. This show was produced by the team at thinkPARALLAX, a sustainability and communications agency with 2 decades of experience working with companies at every stage of the sustainability journey. We are experts at assessing where a company is today, defining a North Star, and developing a roadmap to get there. If your team needs sustainability guidance or training, or you have a recommendation for a guest or a topic on the show, visit us at thinkparallax.com. We'd love to hear from you.